Hello and welcome back to another Craig and Dave Unscripted. So today, Dave and I are going to be discussing workbooks. Are they good or are they bad? Should we use them? Should we ditch them? All depends, I guess, on the last inset you went to and the last course you went to, the last person you spoke to. So we're gonna present two sides here. But before we go into it, Dave, controversial question. so so what let's get this straight. What is a booklet, a workbook, an exercise book, a textbook? Because people refer to them differently. We want people to understand what it is we're talking about here.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's controversial other than the fact that we spent 5 minutes before we started recording discussing this and then thought, why don't we just press the record button because this is all part of it. So, yeah, I guess, and I think we're agreed on this, I guess a textbook is where you just have text, illustrations, photographs, and you might have some questions or discussion points or something, but there's nowhere in the book where students are expected to actually write something. I think that would be my definition of a
course
textbook.
text. You've probably bought it from a separate publisher, follows a spec.
And then And then I think a booklet is where you take the essence of a textbook, but you include space where students can maybe draw their own pictures, they can answer exam questions, they can do something like that. So it's still a textbook, but it's got a place where you complete parts of it. But that's perhaps not the dominant part of it, maybe. Well, maybe it is, but you've got a real balance between the textbook aspect and then the student response aspect. I think that's what a booklet is.
Yeah.
And then I think a workbook is somewhere where the students actually predominantly they fill it in. Okay, it might have some little textual prompts and bits and pieces like that, but it's not intended to kind of give them the text of the content they're learning. It really is just a place for them to sort of record all their answers. And I think that's the difference. I think if we put them on a spectrum, we've got textbooks on one end, we've got workbooks on the other end, and booklets are kind of in the middle between.
Okay, so I'm going to disagree with you live and unscripted. You're right. I think both booklets and workbooks, as you say, are both in the middle. At the other end of the spectrum, we have exercise books.
Oh, sure.
So that's what it is. I mean, people refer to booklets and workbooks interchangeably. We have the articles we're going to refer to them as booklets. We're going to refer to them as workbooks. As Dave said, though, they've got text, they have structure, but it's an interactive element. The student's engaging, and you could argue whether the booklet's a workbook. But what we're talking about here is, have you given them a blank exercise book with graph paper or lines? You write your heading, you write your dates, and then you've got the textbook at the other end. There's nothing the students do. It's a reference guide. What we're talking about is the thing in the middle, isn't it? That's it. And, is there a strict definition? I don't know. So booklets, workbooks, an interactive textbook that the students engage with and fill in and answer, more than just a sheet of lines, papers. Do we like them? Do we support them? Wow. As always, we like to back everything up with research, don't we, Dave? And so this, you found these articles. So this first chap, Mark Enser, is that how I pronounce it? Enser?
Yeah, I'm guessing Mark Enser, yeah.
Why I avoid using booklets. So this guy's against them. Boo! Booklets are bad. Get rid of them.
I think that's a bit strong. I think, Mark, if you are watching this at some point, because someone has said, hey, there's a couple of guys here who are talking about you, you might want to watch this video. No, we're not. We're not saying that you completely diss booklets. What we're saying is that we came across an article in TES that sparked our interest because the title was Why I Avoid Using Booklets in My Lessons. And then I think in a subsequent article, someone then came up with why I love using booklets in my lessons. So we thought it would be great just to kind of pit the two things against each other and sort of pitch in with our own views.
This is a great example of what we were saying in last week's video, or maybe the video before now, that you've got to constantly keep up with things and constantly questioning your own practice. Why am I doing this? Is it just because someone told me in an inset that's what I should be doing? What makes their opinion any better than what you're doing? It's why are you doing it? What's the benefit? What's it giving the students? How's it helping their learning? Is it making your classroom practice better or worse? And here are two articles by two, educated, respected people, and they both make valid points. I'm just going to get out there now. If you're a Craig and Dave user, we do use workbooks, but that doesn't mean anything we're about to bring up in Mark's article here is not valid. So it was just a great point, isn't it? Because you will come across it. And I think as long as you're always having those conversations and you are thinking and you are asking why, then that really is what's important. So two different people here with two different opinions. Dave and I, obviously, with our own opinions, we'll throw in. We'll also pop the links at some point, I guess, to the actual test articles if people want to find those. Oh, in fact, yes, sorry, I have them there.
Yeah, so that's the first one. Yeah, let's get
the first one by Mark then. So this is why I avoid using booklets in lessons.
Yeah.
Right. Do you want to start then, Dave?
Yeah, okay. So let's just bring up the article. Now, I'm not going to read it, okay? So I'm going to read it to you, but just as a reference, what I've done is just sort of pasted it into a PDF just so we can sort of make a bit of reference to it. So here we are, why I avoid using booklets in my lessons. Mark Enser, booklets are growing in popularity, but there's a risk they'll become the curriculum rather than a tool to support it. So an interesting proposition there, I thought. So if we scroll down, then Mark makes a number of points about sort of relying on booklets and things like that. And what he's really saying is that the problem with booklets is that it hems you in. It gives you that structure, and it means that you're not deviating from it, and you become over reliant on it. And I think this is interesting. I'm just going to have a look at some of the paragraphs in here. We're not going to read the whole lot, but just a few bits and pieces. So he says, at the moment, when I teach a lesson, I'm constantly chopping and changing it. I might discover partway through a lesson that pupils are not secure at doing something as I thought they were, so I decide to change the planned activity to give them a chance to practice. It could be that a class discussion reveals a new line of thinking about the topic, and I want to adapt an upcoming task so that pupils refer to and build on these ideas. Now, this is really interesting because I completely get it. If you've got a booklet or a workbook and you start at page 1 and then you do page 2 and then you do page 3, and you're not sort of doing the bit that Craig and I would advocate, which is, taking the temperature of your classroom and thinking about how are the students sort of getting on, how are they reacting to this, what are some of the questions they're asking, how well are they engaging with it. Of course, I would call that sort of taking the temperature of your classroom. And you have to react to that, right? And I think there's perhaps a misconception here that once you start doing work in a booklet, you only do work in a booklet, and there's no opportunity to kind of get out of working from the booklet. And I don't see why that has to be a thing. I don't know what your thoughts are, Craig.
No, I mean, absolutely. And I mean, people who use Craig and Dave resources will know we provide workbooks with the sort of structure that Mark here is suggesting can be a bit restrictive. We provide those at GCSE. Now, we do remove those completely at A level to go for a much more pick and mix and a much more independent approach. But even at GCSE, Mark is absolutely right. Any one of them, a given lesson may go off at a tangent at any moment. And I think he alludes towards the end of his article about that being one of the real skills of the teaching profession and being a good teacher is adapting on the fly. And his argument is valid that if you prepare a detailed workbook at the very maybe months in advance and you cram it for, that's what you teach, you're only then teaching to the workbook and not the curriculum. I think he refers to the workbook becoming in danger of becoming the curriculum, and these are all things that you should be aware of. But that doesn't stop you at any point, I would argue. You just have to be more aware at saying, right, okay, we've clearly got some misunderstandings here. Pop the workbook down. We're going to have a class discussion. We're going to have another go at an activity. Let's get around the whiteboard, get into groups, X, Y, Z. So everything he is saying, and this is the beauty, we've got two articles, and of course they're catching titles: why I avoid workbooks, why I like workbooks. But when you get into them, both authors are a lot more balanced than that. I just think if you have workbooks, it's a case of not becoming constrained and confined by them. A point which Mark makes very well. You mustn't let workbooks almost become your curricula. And then you are unable to adapt on the fly to the needs of your students. So as I said, and we ourselves do remove that scaffolding at A level in order to promote and generate more independence as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit of a shame, if a teacher writes to us and says, oh, your workbooks are a bit formulaic, oh, all your lessons are the same, oh, all the students do in your lessons is complete workbooks. We don't get many of those emails, to be fair, but occasionally they pop up. And in that situation, the student and the teacher have both completely missed the point. That the workbook gives you a scaffold, it gives you a framework, it makes sure that when you get to the end of a topic, you've captured and taught and learned everything that you were supposed to. It's the framework. It doesn't mean that you don't enrich that framework, that's not what it's like. I mean, to use an analogy for a moment, what we're providing with the workbooks is that the scaffolding and the tent, if you like, for a circus, but the circus act that happens inside that scaffolding and that tent and that workbook, well, that's what it's really all about.
Yes, sorry, to double down on that as well, the over-reliance on the workbook and sitting back and going, well, you crack on with the workbook. If you do use our GCSE resources, the workbooks are one part of a structure of the lesson. Every lesson starts with a starter, which can be a discussion, a group activity, a paired activity. The workbook is then part of the lesson, in which there may well be activities you do in groups. There'll be part of a lesson where you break away, put the workbook down and get on with programming. So even within that, the idea of, well, they're just cracking on with workbooks all the time, it's not the case. The lessons we design have a variety of different elements to them. And even that, as I said, you need to be responsive in that lesson and not be afraid to put the workbook down and get the kids around the whiteboard and all that kind of stuff. It's just constantly being responsive, but it does give you some structure. And I know we're going to go into it later. One of the key reasons we do it is to provide the students, once it's complete, with everything they need in a concise, clean manner for revision. I probably will get on to knowledge organisers later, a bit of a buzzword, but that's another reason we went for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as Craig suggests, our workbooks, they do contain activities to create, a local area network, for example. And what we've done is we've provided the students with the graphics and icons and things like that, so they're not wasting time trying to find pictures on the internet and arguing about, fluffy cats and things like that that they find instead. We just provide them with the tools, but they do the activity in a workbook that they otherwise might have done, on a piece of paper or something like that. That's right. I mean, one of our activities on abstraction says make paper airplanes, and that's part of the workbook because the activity is built into the workbook, because there's then a text box that says compare your paper aeroplane to a real aeroplane. What are the differences and what's important for your aircraft to fly? And so it's just a way of capturing that moment of learning. But that's not the fun bit. That's just capturing the moment of learning and what's important for exams. So there we go. So let's have a look at the second paragraph here. So in my subject of geography, and of course we're talking about computer science, and now is an opportunity to think about some of the differences here. In my subject of geography, we might change a scheme of work to reflect new examples as they occur. I'm currently teaching tectonics in year 8 and have no plan and had no plan when I started to include volcanic eruptions in La Palma, but certainly will now. I continue to read around my subject, watch a documentary, hear something on the radio, and I adapt what I'm teaching. And I think there are some subjects where that's more important. I think geography, is a classic example where things happen and it's very topical. Business studies, economics, subjects like that. There are topical things. That's not to say there aren't topical things in computer science, but they have less impact on what our students need to learn for exams. So we have a unit on ethics and advances in technology and things like that, which you can pull in sort of pertinent discussions at that point. But there are many aspects of the specification that frankly don't change. They might have changed in the real world, But what we're teaching is still sort of 1940s, 1950s architectures, and that isn't going to change and hasn't changed. And so it's not as relevant, I think, in our subjects to be as spontaneous. Don't misread that as we don't do any spontaneity. Of course we do, but a lot of it's not important for students for exams, which is kind of what we sort of focus on a bit there. What do you think, Craig?
I mean, you are right. In subjects like geography, there's a heavy reliance on case studies, being aware of case studies. I actually did a geography A-level, being able to reference case studies in your example, whereas in a computer science exam, if a question requires a scenario, it will be given to you as part of the question. Really, it's just so you can put your answer into context. But even so, even with a booklet, that doesn't stop you saying, brilliant, we're learning about this today and you're doing that. Well, this was excellent, because in the news this week, we had this great report of this cyber attack against the NHS and the ransomware. And we're currently doing a workbook about cyber threats and malware. It wouldn't stop me one little bit with bringing that into the class and into the lesson and using that to liven the lesson up a bit. And he's absolutely right again, of course, you know, being able to respond and just make the subject more relevant, whether it's geography, computer science or anything, is something you should just be doing as a teacher. But I don't feel the structure in the GCSE workbooks prevents that or disables you from doing it. As Mark says, though, you just mustn't sort of become too confined by it. I've just noticed his next paragraph here is kind of saying what I'm saying. I'm talking about being confined. He's got, you know, my concern is that if everything's prepared in a booklet months in advance, how locked in are these to plans? Will they be reticent to update a scheme of work, change lesson plans? And I think the answer is no, there mustn't be, because if you're not going to be responsive to these things, you know, if you're not going to adapt to your students, then you're not doing what Dave and I keep questioning, which is, you know, to constantly ask why, what can I do differently? What can I do better? And it's that real last sentence of the paragraph I'm currently looking at. Will these booklets not end up becoming rather than supporting the curriculum? And the article we're going to look at in a minute, I think, does nicely address that issue. I think that's maybe where workbooks and booklets maybe then become bad. Maybe that's not the right word, or become detrimental if all you do is follow the workbook strictly and it's very rigid. I think as long as those booklets don't become the curriculum and you can respond and you can adapt and you can interject and you can have those discussions, personally, I feel all they do is, you know, all they do then is really help add that structure.
Yeah, and I think that with our work booklets, you know, there are some pages where it says find a relevant case study or find an article from the news. And so we're not prescribing exactly what it is that they're going to be looking at. But there's a space in their workbook for them to do it. The other reason why we provide our workbooks, and again, this is a computer science thing, but we provide our workbooks as PowerPoint files because it's really easy for a student to just insert an extra slide. So if you've got a 14-page booklet, slides 1 to 14, and you get to slide 7 and there's something topical and you want to include it, then you can easily say to the students, right, can you just insert a slide between 7 and 8, please? And of course, because we're using PowerPoint templates, it will bring in the headers and everything automatically when you do that. And you get a blank page. Go and insert what is relevant, you know, at that point in time. So booklets, when they're printed, can be quite restrictive unless you do a lot of forward thinking about building in some blank pages and blank boxes and things like that would be helpful. But as electronic booklets, then they're brilliant. You can, you know, you can change them and adapt them how you like. And certainly there are some times with my students where I might just delete a page because I just think, you know, it's not that important. It was a bit of extra work to enrich what we're doing. I haven't really got time for it. Let's just delete that page. You know, so flexibility, I think, is the order of the day, and that's what you're talking about, Craig. And booklets don't prevent that as long as you build the booklet with that in mind, I think.
Yeah, you're right. I think really what Mark is saying here, isn't he? Is there are some dangers, and in his article articulates that he doesn't feel maybe that the benefits outweigh some of those dangers, and until he can be convinced, and those dangers are all valid, and he spells them out really well. We've got a nice little summary. So, and I guess these are the dangers of workbooks if you aren't responsive, as we're saying, and as we're going to show you in the other article, they can form a rigid structure. They can encourage you to, they can encourage getting to the end instead of actual learning. There is that sense of, I completed the workbook, I'm done. Well, performance at a given moment in time doesn't equate to learning over time. That's very valid, and can become a textbook where students don't do much for themselves, But I think they are dangers to be aware of, just as there are with the dangers and pitfalls of any teaching technique, and I think the benefits outweigh. Is it probably useful to look at the other side, because we're making a lot of the counter arguments, but Clive makes them very well. So, as I said, an excellent article there by Mark, and lots of things to definitely be aware of. The flip side, then, totally different article, booklets, why they're effective and how I use them, and again a lot of valid points. And again, I'll pop that URL up briefly on the screen. I will take it down pretty quickly, but you can just pause the video if you want to see the actual article. So this one's for the test as well, then? Yes, it is.
Yep.
And I believe this was in a direct response to Mark, wasn't it? And again, he backs up a lot of Mark's points, but takes a different stance. I'd say one that we probably more side with. So do you want to lead on this then? So Clive's why they are effective and how he uses them.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a classic, where where Clive has responded to Mark. So he says, Mark Enser is correct. The use of booklets in secondary schools is becoming more popular, and goes on to talk about why he introduced booklets 3 years ago, and what he's doing with them. And again, I'm not going to sort of read the article. You can go back and grab the hyperlink that we put on the screen and read it, and read aspects of it that are on the screen now. But in essence, what he's saying is, no, booklets don't define the curriculum. It is a tool for you to deliver the curriculum. And that's what we've just spent the past 20 minutes really talking about. Something that's really interesting, though, in Clive's article here is he said that you can build your booklets to encourage interleaving. So this idea that instead of just teaching topic 1, topic 2, topic 3, topic 4, and you have booklet 1, booklet 2, booklet 3, booklet 4 that focus on those topics. And to be honest, that is what we do, and this is causing me to reflect a little bit here. An interesting idea would be to build in pages in a booklet that actually you can't answer right now. You don't have a sufficient knowledge holistically of the subject to really tackle that. But later you might come back to that page in the booklet. So you teach topic 1, 2, 3, 4, and having done topic 4, there's something now in topic 1 that you can enrich and build on, and you can encourage interleaving in your booklets by returning to parts that couldn't be completed at the time. And I think that's a really interesting thought, because interleaving instead of blocking is supposed to improve learning and performance, but it's a struggle as to know how to do it for the best. And I will be honest, there's a lot of comfort in taking the specification and just teaching the topics as they appear in the specification. So that's a really interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, one thing he's got here as well, and this is what teachers should be doing. He makes it quite clear that the booklets are not simply something which capture everything from the spec and that's it. There's on all three of these paragraphs, you can see there's quite a lot of effort here by him and by the subject team and the department. They have a meeting to make sure there's a real sequence of learning in these booklets, to make sure what he calls these where the golden threads, to make sure these golden threads and concepts weave through the booklets, and then to revisit them as well and decide, is there a better way of doing it? And this is everything we were talking about being reflected with it. And, even I think maybe the original author Mark might say, well, regardless of what you do, even if you do all that planning and you've got your golden threads and you're interleaving and you leave printing to the last minute so you can be responsive, there's still that chance that a news article pops up. Well, that doesn't matter. You just bring it up, you discuss it in the lesson, you build it in, you be dynamic. And as the earlier author Mark rightly said, that is one of the key skills of teaching and a reason, you know, that the profession is quite tricky. Bringing that subject to life on the fly, depending on what's happened yesterday, what the kids are saying at that moment in time, where they're taking a discussion, especially when you start to get to GCSE and A level, that happens a lot more. So I don't think any of that prevents you. But yes, he's who are we on here? Clive. Yeah, Clive isn't simply producing a workbook that covers all the spec. There's a lot of thought going into the activities that are in there, and you know, and why, to provide that structure and scaffolding.
Yeah, it's interesting that Clive says in the paragraph here, I agree that there needs to be a cautious approach to using booklets. Like so many excellent things in teaching, there's a risk they'll mutate into something that they were never meant to be. And this is the critical thing, isn't it? It's not that workbooks are good or bad. Workbooks can be good and workbooks can be bad. It really just depends on how you're using them and whether they're actually fulfilling that intention that you've got in teaching. You know, that's really, really important, that you've got the intent. What do you intend to do? What's the intention of this workbook? How do you implement that in your classroom? How do you make use of it and get the best use out of it? And then what is the impact of that? And how are you measuring that impact in your classroom in order to make a good judgment about whether not the whole booklet is right or wrong, but whether aspects of that booklet and the delivery of that booklet are right or wrong? So you know, although it's an Ofsted thing to say, I think for me, it's one of the most important things Ofsted have said in recent years, which is when you reflect, you know, have a look at your intent, your implementation, and your impact. And I think that structure is really powerful, actually, for teachers to take a look at what they're doing and asking, you know, whether what they're doing is what they intended to be doing, and does it have the right impact. So I think that's really, really powerful. So that's that. So he then goes on and talks about, you know, some things like don't print them months in advance, focus on the scheme of work, build booklets around Rosenshine's principles. So let's not have a big discussion about Rosenshine's principles, because we could do a whole video on that. But in essence, Craig, I think here, you know, there's an opportunity to introduce new material in small steps. There's an opportunity to, you know, model for students, model answers and provide them with illustrations and exemplars and things like that, an example of what good looks like. There's all sorts of things that workbooks enable you to do. They are a vehicle for your great teaching. I don't know if you have views on that.
Well, I'll tell you what, we're nicely kind of merging into our last bit, really, which is our verdict. I think it's quite clear what our verdict is, although, you know, we fully understand what Mark is saying in the first article, and there are lots of things there for you to be aware of. You know, we do provide workbooks at GCSE to provide that scaffolding. Now, I appreciate the quality here is not fantastic. I could just maybe move that over a little bit there, but yes, we provide these workbooks at GCSE for all the reasons which Dave was saying, to provide the structure and scaffolding. This is an example of one from Memory and Storage. You know, a wide range of activities to support the student. Lots of what's happening here. Here's another one you were saying. This is not necessarily that you're stuck to a workbook. This actually gets them to do something outside with another exercise we provide them, and then they cut and paste the answer in here. And of course, what we're doing here as well is providing a single stop shop for where all the information for this topic will go. Because how would I have done that previously? Oh, well, you've got that. Yeah, print that out. Yeah, or stick it in your, get the print. Oh, sheets everywhere, loose bits of paper, things sticking out, things falling out. It's not that they only stick to the workbook. These activities I know on the screen here, these large boxes, are done separately. We have additional resources. We have Excel sheets they open and they paste their answers. And we have a wide range here. And you can see down the bottom the support for the students. Another thing this does is allow students to have a lot more independence during the lesson, but none of this stops us from intervening, having those discussions, you know, stretching those students, talking about something in the news. And one thing I definitely wanted to return to, and we mentioned it briefly earlier, one of the big reasons we like this is at the end, they have one of these workbooks per topic. possibly 2 for if there's any particularly large topics. This is an example of a topic where we've actually split it into 2 workbooks, but on average they end up with, you know, maybe a dozen workbooks at the end of the course. And what they have is knowledge organizers. So if I just, this is the blank version, obviously the student would fill out, and here is a completed A-star version. Now we provide those fully completed, so you know the teachers can help mark
grade
work.
9, Craig. Grade 9. Get with it. It's no A-star at GCSE.
A-star?
No A-star at GCSE. Come on. You're showing your age again.
Straight before this video, where did I come from? I came from when I taught an A-level class, so context. So there you go. But yeah, sorry, grade 9 workbook, and we provide those. And of course, if the student has a good workbook that they filled out themselves, excellent. Yeah, job's done. Yeah, they've got a knowledge organized. They've got a nice little revision guide. If they missed a lesson or bits of work or really confused and are struggling, you can give these out. How many times on forums we see, has anyone got a set of knowledge organizers for this topic and that topic? Our workbooks turn into knowledge organizers. They contain everything you need. I mean, the spec is literally on that first slide there. The spec is there. And every point of that spec is then delivered to a grade 9 answer in the answers we provide. So the students are building their own knowledge organizer, their own revision unit throughout the year. And if you wish, you could just give them your grade 9 examples at the end to revise from as well. So, I mean, I think that's just another little icing on the cake there. I think when this knowledge organizer term started being thrown around quite a bit a few years ago, we did debate for a while. Oh God, should we be doing this? Everyone's went knowledge organizer. And then we sat, hang on a second, what actually are knowledge organizers? We've got them. We've got them. Let's not reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, exactly. If you turn your booklets or workbooks into a format that means once they're completed, they contain enough text and supporting material to be a revision guide and not so much text that they become a textbook, but the activities and the things that students are doing in that workbook gives them exactly precisely the knowledge that they need, then you have produced a knowledge organizer as a result of completing the workbook. And for us, that's really important. What we don't want to do is give students loads of things to do in class, and then having done all that, when it gets to the end of the course, then say, now here's your revision guide, because somehow the classwork that you did is not as useful or as concise as this revision guide. And we wanted to just square that a little bit and think, you know, well, if we make everything that the student does in a lesson relevant to what they're going to need at the end of the day and eliminate the waffle, but still include the things that are fun. So they don't necessarily record all the additional activities and fun things that we do in their workbook, because that's just to enrich the lessons and make it really interesting.
Absolutely.
But at the end of the day, the workbook that they produce is the raw things they need to know. It is the revision guide. And I think we've done a pretty good job on that, if I'm honest. So it's about focusing on what's important. For me, that's the one of the critical benefits of a workbook. It focuses on what's important. And for us in computer science, it eliminates random sheets of paper. So those long-term viewers of Unscripted will know that a lot of what we do is based on our experience in the classroom and trying to solve problems, identify what the problems are, why do students underachieve, and then build tools and things that enable us to solve those problems. So one of the problems that I realized in my class was that at the end of the course, students had lots of random files in their home directory with inappropriate file names. They could never find anything that they were looking for. They'd have some random printouts where I have kind of throughout the course said, right, let's print this out. And I gave them a sort of a cardboard folder, and they would put their random printouts in that folder with no order, no sense of the learning journey. And so they get to the end of the course, and that's all they had. They had a ton of files that were not structured particularly well. And there was no consistency between them. They'd have a load of extra things I chucked in, and they didn't know if they were important or not. Then they had a set of random printouts in a cardboard folder, and they were like, well, the work I've done for the past 2 years is useless. And if I was honest, it was, because what was important was the last few months where we did revision and, you know, went through a revision guide. That's kind of what was important. And I thought, that can't be right. That can't be right. I need to get to the end of the course and make sure that all their classwork is well structured. It shows the learning journey and it enables them to revise effectively from that work in order to do well in exams. So eliminating these random pieces of paper that we get in computer science, not so much these days because people are sort of moved away from printing. I don't know if that's because A, the printer's always out of ink, or the printer's always out of paper, or the printer is always jammed, or the printer is always printing some massive job and yours is behind the queue. All of those things happen. And I think, you know, computer science teachers have become so frustrated with printing over the years that they're now saying, oh, well, it's not good for the environment anyway, let's not do it. So everything's submitted electronically now. But yeah, and the other thing I think, Craig, you might want to talk about this a little bit, because you've worked with teams of teachers where everyone does something slightly different. The beauty, I think, of well-structured and well-thought-through team-led workbooks is it gives you that consistency in the team. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's absolutely right, isn't it? I mean, you only have to look at a lot of Ofsted inspectors where they turn around and say the good schools are the ones where, you know, threads are not only consistent between departments, but between teachers within departments. And you ever have any sort of learning walk and it's like, you know, you come to the head department, well, what's happening in your subject? You should expect to be able to see this, this, and this. Let's walk around and have a look, shall we? And at my school, I think maybe there was a period where I was maybe a bit too structured. There's a lot of argument to be allowing teachers to have their own freedom, obviously. But from a top-down point of view, absolutely. You want to know that the students in one class are having the same quality experience of education in another. Every teacher will bring their own, you know, unique style to teaching, their own anecdotes, their personal experiences to the lesson. And
their own fairy dust.
Their own fairy dust, that's it. But you don't want to, especially as a middle leader, you don't want students having a very different learning experience in one lesson to another, especially not if you can identify that one particular method is superior. This is a way of making sure there's a certain backbone quality and consistency. You know where that bar is, you know it's being done. That doesn't mean the teachers can't add their own flair, the fairy dust. Of course they can, and that should be encouraged. And you know, that's what makes a teacher you remember. So I just think you're right. Those workbooks, and it's not that we don't really have the workbook nature at Key Stage 5. It's just that they now build their workbook based on a series of activities. We call them SLRs. But what happens at the end of our course at A-levels, the same at GCSE. They end up automatically with knowledge organisers. We've just removed the independence and allow them to pull components from more areas. But again, you know, supplying that rich level of resources, supplying those workbooks, you're guaranteeing a certain level of baseline consistency across your teachers. And I think that is really important.
Yeah, I do too. And of course, from the student point of view, it shouldn't matter what class they're in.
No, absolutely not.
Because like you say, they get that backbone, I think you called it, which is really important. And of course, students that are absent, they know what they've missed.
Yeah,
because there are missing pages in their workbook. You know, they come back in, the class has moved on. They were doing page 6 and now they're doing page 8. They've obviously missed page 7. And, you know, there's an opportunity to catch up there. And especially with our teaching and computer science, because they can watch a Craig and Dave video and then they can complete that page of their workbook completely independently. So, you know, it gives you, again, a vehicle. We're not saying you should be overly structured here, but it gives you that vehicle to support students that are absent and can fall behind. And I think something that's really important and something that Ofsted have stressed is that learning journey. Students can see where they're starting and where they're going, that journey that they're on. If they know, for example, that there are 8 workbooks and the 8 workbooks across the course cover this, this, and this, and you were showing on the screen earlier, Craig, having that specification on the front of every workbook, they can see exactly what they're learning, why they're learning it, and what they're going to be learning next. And I think that whole journey is really important. And I think in my early days of teaching, I didn't give that enough credibility. And I I knew the kind of structure and the curriculum in my own head. I knew the specifications in my head, and I could refer to them. But I kind of made it up as I was going along. And as long as we all got to the end point by the end of the course, it didn't really matter. And it was all a bit loosey-goosey. And I knew the structure. And I didn't think it was important that the students necessarily knew it. It was more important that they engaged with what we were doing in class. But actually, over the years, I've come to realize that them understanding the journey we're on and the relevance of what they're learning and how they're going to be assessed on that at the end of the day actually is important.
I was going to throw in as well. I mean, this is obviously totally down to your individual school and what policies you have. But by doing the workbook and having that single place that provides that standard allows you the perfect opportunity to add other stuff in beyond the workbook exercises. So here's another workbook we do. Again, wide variety of activities. But what we do with every workbook is we provide a section in the workbook at the end for capturing assessment, for capturing feedback from the teacher, for capturing a response. And of course, that can adapt to your school's contents and what your requirements are for assessment and feedback. We include a section for the students there to rag rate their understanding, and apologize for the difficult display on the screen share here, but these are all the statements from the specification that's on the front page of the workbook in a series of simpler statement sentences for students and a quick rag rating exercises. And then the student can reflect and say, right, well, when I get there, I know I'm going to focus on these areas. So by doing a workbook, not only can we have obviously a baseline of activities and structure, turn it to a knowledge organizer, but you can then use that as a one-stop shop to put your specification references, feedback, your rag rating, maybe an end of topic test. You can do what you like with it, obviously, but it does get around a lot of that. Yes, as you said, loose bits of paper, exercise. Oh, I've got another end of topic test that I did here. You better keep that. I've marked it. It's in a nightmare.
So our verdict then, here's my verdict then, Craig. You can have your own verdict. My verdict is, Mark, you raised some interesting points that I would like to reflect on, but Clive, you're right.
Yes, my verdict is I'm definitely more team Clive than team Mark. However, what Mark does do, and I hope we've paid that credence, is that he makes some excellent valid points about the dangers of workbooks along with any teaching practice or pedagogy, and that they're very valid, and as long as you don't fall into those, I think workbooks are a good thing. Right, well, thank you very much, everyone. There was a highly controversial discussion today. If you want a controversial video, look back at last week's Unscripted, where Dave and I ripped apart teaching pedagogies that we don't think are appropriate in today's day and age. That was a controversial one, I'm sure, to some members of SLT. This one, not so much. Thank you very much again, everyone. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.